Welcome, Jumbo 2026. We're so glad that you're joining us in this new year, and you are listening to Operation Power, a voice for Black radical politics and revolutionary change. My name is Inez Barron, and I am the co-host along with my husband, the bold, the outspoken, the indomitable, the unbought, the unbossed, the one and only
Charles Barron. And we're just so honored tonight to be on with Chairman Omali Yeshitela. But I'm even most honorable and humbly on with the love of my life, the stunningly beautiful, brilliant Inez Barron.
Thank you so much.
Excuse me, 43 years of marriage. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. We're so pleased that the chairman has joined us, and we've got an exciting program, and we're glad that you're here with us. But we do first want to start our program in our usual fashion, which is to offer a libation. So we have a video in which we call the ancestors to come and bear witness and help us as we continue along our journey in this struggle that we're on. So this time we're going to share our libation video with you.
For African people, nothing important happens without a libation. And so for this very important presentation, we begin by the pouring of libation. We pour libation first to our first ancestor, to that hidden one who, though hidden, manifests in all things as all things, that God-goddess idea in the universe by any and all names. To our first ancestor, we pour libation, Ashe. We pour libation too to our ancestors because they were the first people on this planet, mothers and fathers of all mankind, flashpoint of the human family. To those ancestors we pour libation, Ashe. Pour libation too to our ancestors because they were the ones who first gave birth to the idea of civilization, knew we would need a form of governance, and they nurtured that idea along the Nile until it reached its zenith in Kemet. There they built these gigantic monuments as evidence of that great civilization, and they carved instructions on the walls of temples and tombs for us, so we would never forget. To those ancestors we pour libation, Ashe. Pour libation too to our ancestors because over time they put together all the tenets of civilization, and they took those ideas and left the continent. They were the people of the first Exodus. They left Africa and went all over the world and peopled the world. To those ancestors we pour libation, Ashe. We pour libation too to our ancestors because they did not sit on their laurels. They continued to improve, continued to evolve, and at each point of evolution, they again would leave the continent and settle and resettle the planet. They met themselves coming and going. To those ancestors we pour libation, Ashe. Pour libation too to those ancestors because over time they found themselves the object of a forced exodus. They were kidnapped, shackled, cargoed, shipped out of Africa and enslaved in diasporas around the world. To those ancestors we pour libation, Ashe. Pour libation too to the ancestors left at home, the very young, the aged, the infirm, left to reinvent themselves, depleted of us, human resources. But they were enjoined by us in the diasporas, both objects of a global myopia that ruptured the soul of a people as it ravaged a continent. To those ancestors we pour libation, Ashe. Pour libation too to those ancestors because over time they began to remember who and what they were. Because no matter where they had been dropped off, they still retained bits and pieces of who and what they were. They retained that African core that described them. They began to remember bits and pieces of a song. They began to remember lines from a rhythm. They began to remember dances that they did in ancient times. They began to remember those ancient drum beats that they now beat out on bare skin. And so to those ancestors we pour libation, Ashe. Pour libation too to them because they then began to teach each other. They began to resurrect and reconstruct that history and that culture. They became the new Africans wherever they were. They became the new teachers, preachers, archaeologists, the new singers, dancers, the new drummers, the new Jalia. They reconstructed that history and our culture and became new Africans everywhere. So to those ancestors we pour libation, Ashe. Pour libation to those.
Ashe-o.
Ashe-o.
Well, we're excited. Our topic today is the U.S. bombing of Venezuela. what it means to Africans at home and abroad. And we've got an excellent guest with us today. It's Chairman Omali Yeshitela, and a personal friend of ours. We've known him for many years. He began his work in the 60s in the civil rights and the human rights struggle, and has been in the forefront of the battle for reparations. The organization, the African People's Socialist Party, has done extensive, outstanding work. They've built basketball courts, they have community gardens, they have doula training, they have the ability to rehab houses in their community and bring them forward to the people who are living in the community at an affordable rate. And we are just pleased with the work that we've done, that they have done. We've been there and we've seen it with our own eyes. And what we want to do is, he's also the author of several books, An Uneasy Equilibrium and Yeshitela Speaks. He's our guest, he's our friend, and we want to start with a video.
And we're going to start with a video where he was at Oxford, the Oxford debate. Malcolm X was there, but also the African People's Socialist Party. They're all over the continent. They're in Europe. They're in Toronto, Canada. They're all over the world. And Omali Yeshitela, we consider him the leading, foremost African revolutionary theorist, with his theory of African internationalism. That is the theory that guides our actions and our behavior and our strategies and tactics, because you always have to mix theory and practice. You don't want to have a whole lot of practice, don't know where you're going, a whole lot of theory and ain't practicing, you're armchair revolutionary. So we appreciate Omali Yeshitela. So we wanted to show this clip where he, did a just outstanding job. It's a long piece, but we're going to give you just a piece of it today. Since we have him here, he can do the rest. But this is Omali Yeshitela in 2019 at Oxford University.
I now look to Omali Yeshitela to continue the case for the proposition.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, I have only recently come here from the United States of America. And that being the case, I cannot stand before this august body without prefacing my statement in defense of closer unity of Africa, without stating first my unconditional solidarity with President Maduro and the government and people of Venezuela, who are currently under attack, savage attack, by the declining world hegemon of the United States. I think it's absolutely necessary to say that coming from that country, and especially looking at the fact that the United States travels the world preening, presenting itself as the guardian of democracy and the rights of the peoples around the world, where the reality is that Africans who are colonized in the United States represent at least half of the largest prison population in the world. There are more Africans in prison in the United States than there are people in Djibouti or in Equatorial Guinea. And so we find it very difficult, also recognizing that by their own estimates, it would take 228 years for the income of Africans colonized in the United States to equal that of the colonial white population. So it is absolutely necessary for me to stand here today before you expressing total opposition to the United States government terroristic actions against the people of Venezuela, with an attempt to starve the people into opposition to their government. Mr. President, brothers and sisters, comrades, it is also necessary for us to say that this question of a closer union with Africa, or between Africans, or within Africa, is not a purely academic question, despite the fact that this debate is occurring within the pinnacle of bourgeois academia.
Okay. You got to hear that speech in its entirety. I mean, he rocked the place, got a thunderous ovation when he finished. And when Malcolm X was there, he also got a standing ovation. And I said Oxford University. It's the Oxford Union, where they have these famous debates. So we're honored to have him with us tonight. And can he go further? He delivered a message to the African nation that I thought was profound, putting into proper context. Because, you know, this is not about Trumpism. This is about colonialism. This is not about Trumpism. This is about imperialism, hegemony. So we want the chairman to break down all of that for our viewers. He had a message to the African nation, which was well attended. People from all over the world tuned in for it. So we just wanted to have the Black Power Media audience to get a piece of that. If they weren't on for that piece, they can get them on tonight. So, Chairman, we want to welcome you to Operation Power, to our broadcast. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much, Comrade Charles, and you, the first combatant sitting next to you, the brains in the meeting.
Well, sure.
Yeah. So I just want to really express appreciation to you and the work that you do, all of the work that you do. But I think
Thank you.
a most important thing is this work that you do in terms of permanently engaging our oppressor in this war of ideas, which is critical. And part of what it is that we are talking about, and I think one of the reasons that what I have to say may be of some significance, is that we've reached a point which was really punctuated by the resistance of the Palestinians in Gaza. We've reached a point where the question of colonialism that we've been fighting for, that we've been pursuing in terms of the dialogue in this country and in the world about what it is we were fighting against, has now achieved tremendous significance in the public narrative. People are now having to talk about colonialism. And that's really important, because what happened with our movement is the great leaders of our movement have been those who fought against colonialism. This whole notion of a struggle against racism is relatively new, and it is something that has come as a consequence of the murder of Malcolm, a consequence of the destruction of the Black Panther Party that was fighting against colonialism, and other revolutionary forces. So I think that's extremely important. And I think we've succeeded in pushing this issue of colonialism onto the public agenda. And so now even people who disagree with us and have disagreed with us are having to talk about colonialism. That's what we look at when we see what has happened with current President Maduro and the first combatant there from Venezuela. And I think the thing that's really important is that we have pursued this issue of colonialism so that to help people understand it's more than just a simple policy by a single government or a single state. It may have started as a policy, but this is something that's been going on for 600 or more years. And it has developed for the first time in human history. With an assault on Africa. So the first time in human history, we have a single world economy that's locked the world into a single process where human beings are engaged in the struggle for the production of life and recreation of life in a collective process. And it's characterized by parasitism. And so you have this parasitic relationship of Europe coming, as we know it, coming into existence through enslavement, through the forcible dispersal of African people and the African Revolution throughout the world. People like to talk about how the United States is some kind of a nation of, how do they put it, of immigrants. Well, Africans here are not immigrants. We're captives. And I think it's really important to say that. And we, a group that did not come here looking for a better way of life as the Europeans did, but we lost a better way of life.
That's right.
And if you want to know, we look at what's happening with President Maduro and his wife. It goes back a long time in terms of the creation of the social system. I mean, you can go all the way back to Montezuma, were attacked, by Spain in something like the 1500s. You can, kidnap Montezuma to make the people turn over all their resources. It's the same thing. Bring me the money, bring me the oil, bring me the resources. That's Montezuma. It's a part of the whole process of constructing this world economy that we're talking about, the colonial mode of production. We saw that happen with Haiti, with the capture of Toussaint Louverture, who had won effectively the revolutionary movement, and then took, because there was a presumption he was a gentleman, that he would be treated like a gentleman in the military. The France said they wanted to negotiate with him. He got on a ship to have this meeting, and they sailed off the ship, and they put him in a prison and froze him to death. So you have this. You have it with Geronimo. You have it with Sitting Bull. This whole process of kidnapping colonized people as a part of the way to steal the resources. So I just think it's really important for us to understand this is how the whole thing got constructed. And if you want to talk about kidnapping, then look at the 40 million or more African people who are in this country. So we can't act like something strange and unusual. I do think it's important to make a couple of points quickly, because I know we don't have that much time. So we say the struggle is against colonialism and immortal production. There was a time when there were genuine revolutionaries throughout the world, and they considered, based on Marx's definition of this social reality, they considered the modes of production. Marx is one who really promoted the concept of modes of production, which is really important, because what it does is it gives some kind of science to this arrangement that has occurred in the world where human beings engage in production of life: food, clothing, health, housing, etc. And he defined, them in different ways, and he came up with the concept of capitalism being a mode of production, and that everybody who was a communist or socialist who believed in Marx, genuine people, I'm talking about people like Mao, I'm talking about, even Lenin, at a certain time, they recognized they were engaged in a world struggle. It was a socialist. They thought they were fighting against the capitalist mode of production, not just capitalism simply as it reflected itself in one place, but it was a social system globally. And you had a movement that appreciated that. You had, Cuba, a splendid example of believing in the international revolutionary process that connected the entire world. Che Guevara from Argentina goes to Cuba, participating in the Cuban Revolution, and then leaves Cuba to try to go to Africa to initiate a global, a continental-wide guerrilla war for the liberation of Africa. Leaves Africa, goes into Bolivia where he dies, etc. So there was a recognition at that time. That's not the case so much anymore. And it's not the case because many people have not understood that what Marx characterized as a primitive accumulation of capital what started the whole thing. And what started the whole thing was, as Marx said it, transforming Africa into a what did he call it? A warren for the commercial hunting of black skins. That was part of it. He's transforming Africa into a warren for the commercial hunting of black skins. He talked about the interring of the indigenous people, the Aboriginal people in this land right here, into the mines to bring up gold and silver. And he talked about the East Indians, what was happening to India. How many 50 million or so people in India died in this process of creating the capitalist social system. So he said, this is the primitive accumulation of capital. We say what he defined as the primitive accumulation of capital was actually the advent of a colonial mode of production. The Africa, East Indies, the Americas, etc. And he said that what he characterized as wage slavery, what white people were engaged in Europe, he said wage slavery in Europe required as a pedestal slavery pure and simple in the New World. So this is the process that we are dealing with. And slavery pure and simple is the colonial mode of production, colonialism that we are fighting with, and something that Europeans have never been able to deal with. And even the white people who are now protesting, and many of them are protesting, we support protests, etc. What is happening in Venezuela, because they don't recognize the colonial mode of production will never protest what's happening to Black people is fighting against colonialism. We are fighting against colonialism, and we don't have that kind. The Panthers didn't have it. Panthers had to fight SDS and all of the white left, organizations, because they would not support the struggle against colonialism. It's only when we say we are fighting the manifestation of colonialism as it penetrates the white society that they will offer some kind of support, but you got to call it something that's important to them, like fascism. And so what you hear even now is that people who are protesting the attack on Venezuela, which is consistent, goes along with troops in Washington, D.C., in our community in Washington, D.C. It goes along with what Hessef and Trump said about making the war where? At home against crime. Right. By using our communities as training grounds for the U.S. military forces, etc. Right. They're not talking about this. They're talking about in some generic terms about autocracy, etc. But they're not talking about the history, tradition of murder of African people, of indigenous people here. They don't even, when they talk about Gaza, they don't talk about the concentration camps in this country that's referred to as Indian reservations. But enough. The point that I really want to make is that the colonial mode of production is at work. And when you see what had happened in Venezuela, the reason I go all the way back to Montezuma and what have you, you see colonialism acts like colonialism acts. And if colonialism didn't do it, it wouldn't be colonialism. It is colonialism that we're looking at. And so we have come to a conclusion years and years ago, even before the inception of the African People's Socialist Party, that it's not enough. We have to protest what they're doing. And people should protest and will protest, and we unite with the protest that's going to occur. But protest alone is not enough, because we don't like the world the way it is, how it affects us. And so we just can't keep protesting how it is. We have to build a new world. We have to do the organizing on the ground. So there will be a lot of protesting, but what you will see primarily coming from us is the pursuit of a strategy for the liberation of African people from colonialism, which means that we have to be a self-governing, self-reliant people, etc. That's the thing that we're fighting for. That's what we're involved in. So, they said that they use, I think, 150 warships, airships there in Venezuela. They in order to explain away the violation of the U.S. and the international law, and the U.S. Constitution requires the Congress to be the entity that declares war. Somebody can just go and do it. That's the court. That's the conceptually what the case is. It's supposed to be the Congress that does that. And international law, the United Nations violation of various principles of the United Nations were violated here. So what they have said is that this administration has used a traditional trope, white people's trope, when it comes to attacking people who are not white, who are the colonized. They said, no, this is not war. They said the only reason that we use missiles and the largest, what do they call it, warship in the world, out of Puerto Rico, which is a colony, the largest warship in the world, the only reason we did that and brought all these troops in and killed, we don't know how many people they killed, is because we were serving a warrant for somebody who had been indicted by our courts. And so it's not violation of the law, it's not war. The troops were there, right, but they were there with the FBI, with the DEA, who were there for the purpose of serving a warrant. So that's the thing that they told to the people. It's nonsensical. That's ridiculous. They charge the president with being a drug pusher, a narco terrorist, and this kind of thing. But they think that we have forgotten. They think that we don't remember that it was William Sullivan, the guy who created COINTELPRO, who was promoted to head an organization to go to Southeast Asia at the time to initiate a war against drugs that nobody even knew we were engaged in. It was Sullivan who created an entity that's called ODALE, ODALE, which was a precursor to the DEA. And it was Sullivan and his forces that began the process of putting drugs into the African community here. They think we've forgotten. They think we've forgotten the Iran-Contra case, where you had these high-level military and other people trading drugs for guns that they were given to kill people in El Salvador, where there was a Nicaragua where people were also colonized. They think we've forgotten John Hull, the FBI agent, the CIA agent who had dual citizenship in the United States, also in Honduras, where planes landed on his ranch in Costa Rica, in his ranch in Costa Rica, loaded with guns, and they dropped the guns off for the murderers that they were using to kill people in Nicaragua, to push them back into U.S.-dominated form of slavery, colonialism, and then they were loading the same planes with drugs. And some of these drugs landed in St. Peter's, in Tampa, Florida, at Air Force bases and things like this. So they think we've forgotten, but we have not forgotten. And we're not going to let anybody else forget it. And we know the significance of the warrants. They said that these people are criminals. And so when they start talking about fighting crime, we know that's a trope that they've always used against Black people. They constitute this whole issue of fighting crime. Who was it who came up with the idea of 100,000 cops in the crime omnibus bill? That wasn't Trump. The omnibus crime bill, that was done by Biden, who wrote that. And who was the one who exercised it first in his political campaign to win the presidency, to bring 100,000 policemen into the streets of this country? Everybody knew, all the white people knew that we're talking about 100,000 policemen in this country. It was something that was supposed to control African people. So that's no different from what the National Guards are doing in Washington, D.C., and they're threatening any other place around the country, fighting crime, against killing people, like in Venezuela, capturing a president of Venezuela, humiliating him, his wife, and what have you, and attempting to humiliate the country, saying, we're going to take it over. And then what does he say? Yeah, they said they were fighting crime. They said that they were there because Maduro was a despot. But when you heard the U.S. president in his press conference talking about why he was there, he said nothing about democracy. He said nothing about drugs. He said, we want oil. And he said that several times, oil, and we want money, money, money. That's all he talked about, because that's part of what it was for. That's an aspect of what it was for. So I just think that's, really significant, and something that we need to understand and to handle this question differently. And Africans need to deeply be really, really, really involved in building our capacity for self-determination, actually organizing every inch that we can on the ground for our own capacity and to self-govern.
Well, Chairman, I think you really laid a good foundation for our discussion. And my concern was the same concern that you have, that people need to see this as colonialism and hegemony. Now, Africa, it's interesting that they bombed Nigeria too. And the government in Nigeria, which is Muslim, the president and the vice president is Muslim. However, that Trump knows they weren't going in there to stop them from killing Christians because Muslims were dying too. But Nigeria, which geopolitically is right next to Niger, not far from Burkina Faso, not far from Mali, where the Sahel revolution that took place, kicked France out and kicked the United States out, and Nigeria, oil once again. And I heard that they were upset because Nigeria sold their oil to Russia and China in their currency, in the yuan and in the ruble. So connected two ways in the next pieces that you speak on, connected to the threat on Africa and connected to why it's so important for us right here in the belly of the beast in the domestic colonies of the colonial capitalist system called Black communities.
I think that's really important. I think one thing you should remember too is that the Nigerian government gave them permission to bomb.
That's right.
It cooperated with them. The Nigerian government, the president of whom at one juncture was the head of the AU. ECOWAS. The economic community of West African states. Mm-hmm. And he is the one who threatened to send troops into Niger because they had overthrown the French colonialism. He threatened to do that. Would have done it because they're pawns for the U.S. They're simply extensions of the U.S. state power. But the people in Nigeria and most of Africa were so congratulatory in terms of what these comrades were doing in the Sahel that it would have been, like political suicide for him to do it, even because, as you mentioned, that Niger is right there next to Nigeria, and ethnic groups from Niger live on that side of that border, that artificial border that they created. Said, your troops are not coming through here. You send troops through here, it's going to be a bloodbath. And so that pushed them back on that. So it is true that there's a serious interest in trying to deal with Africa. If you remember what our slogan was with the case with the Uhuru 3, we said hands off Uhuru, and hands off Africa.
That's right.
Because we recognized that what we was looking at before that, to remember for the first time in history, the whole U.S. military, the head of the U.S. military had African face. You had the guy, Austin, who was over the Department of War, as they've correctly now called it. You had the guy who, for the first time in the 146-year history of the United States Marines, they made an African a 4-star general, never happened before, and then put him where? In charge of AFRICOM, controlling Black people. That's right. Controlling Africa from keeping Africa from Africans and from any contention that might have been coming from Russia or China, or anybody else who was trying to interfere there. So the question of Africa has always been central. But the reason it has not always been so visible, because when people who were really interested understood the link between Africans on the continent of Africa and Africans every place else, the people who were really conscious of that have been obliterated and moved out of history. Malcolm talked about it, and actually went to the OAU to speak about the conditions of African people in this country and created an organization of African American unity to try to complement what was happening, there, and made, often made those statements. Malcolm is the one who talked about Lumumba and Congo. He's the one who characterized Shombe as the greatest Uncle Tom in the world, or something to that effect. So there was this obvious connection, and also I can't remember what it was called, but there was some kind of national security memo done by Henry Kissinger many years ago that talked about preventing this unity between Africans on the continent and Africans in the United States. And if you remember also,
And it surfaced recently, a presentation that was made by the comrade who was the leader of the New Jewel movement, Maurice Bishop. What was he saying? He was saying that they saw Grenada Revolution as a major threat, maybe more than Cuba, etc. Because he said it was African, it was English-speaking Africans there who could communicate directly with Africans in the United States. So our enemies have always understood this connection, and they understood enough to keep us separate from this understanding. And even today, you will see that when we somebody said there was an attempted coup in Burkina Faso on the same day that Venezuela was invaded. You know, I see that,
you know what happened? What happened there? We spoke to some people from Venezuela, and they beat it back because they have a people's army around Ibrahim Traore. The people beat it back, and their intelligence picked it up before it really got off and started. So they thwarted that back. This was like the 22nd, 23rd attempt on his life. But just as Castro and Che Guevara did with the Bay of Pigs and all of that, they beat him back because this is not a military coup, really. This is a populist revolution.
Yeah.
People are protecting them. Remember what they did with Hugo Chavez when they took him with a coup and had him under arrest. 2 million came out and liberated him. So yes, it was a coup, but they beat it back.
Well, let me tell you, I think you can anticipate that it's not over in Venezuela.
Oh, yeah.
There are people. There are two journalists, one of whom has worked with us since the Hands Off Uhuru movement. They've joined the Hands Off Uhuru. He heads a news organization called Uranica, Uranica, NICA, I think it is. And by the way, you should have access to them. Jesus Rodriguez, and then there's another woman who is an activist and journalist there also, and we're talking to them. And they are talking about how right there on the ground, how the people that they're not going to be able to do what they say in Venezuela. That to do that, they got to put some bodies on the ground, and that it's not going to be like that, because even in Venezuela, by the way, was relying on some of the same security forces that Traore has, I guess, right now in Burkina Faso, because they're in Burkina Faso, it may be primarily Russians who function as a part of the security force that they have, but there may have been some Russians and certainly Cubans who were with Maduro, and I think that a lot of people, maybe 80 or so people, were killed in that process defending him. And they say there were no U.S. troops killed or anything like that, and that may be the truth. You won't know it, because there are people who are going to get messages that their sons and fathers and daughters and what have you died in car accidents or any other kind of thing. But they may have done that. But the Africa question has always been central. And this has been one of our weaknesses. The whole thing of being able to divide us and keep us separate from the birthright of every living Black person on the planet Earth is Africa and all of its resources. But since we don't recognize that, generally speaking, since that's been kicked out of our consciousness, what we find is that we don't respond to the assault on Africa as an assault on us. So, and that's what it is. And that's what, Garvey, Africa for Africans. He didn't, say for Africans in New Jersey, you know what I'm saying? Africa for Africans at home, in Africa, and abroad. Other places where we have been scattered around the world, etc. And so there has been that kind of recognition. And even especially there in New York, where you are. I mean, there have been, when I was in Namibia, and I met with the person who's characterized as the father of the Namibian nation. And when I got there, somebody from New York rolled up. He had been met at the airport, brought to give almost red carpet treatment, escorted there, and he was somebody who had been associated with an organization that had been created by Elombe Brath so many years ago, and they raised $100,000 for SWAPO, during the era of that struggle and what have you. So, that connection has been there, you see, and some of us have recognized it. And I have my own disagreements with Elombe, but not about that connection,
Right. Well, interesting you mentioned Elombe, because Elombe also brought Thomas Sankara to Harlem and was able to connect Thomas Sankara, who prior to Ibrahim Traore, led Burkina Faso to its liberation. And when you look at the connections that we've had with Africa, especially in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, the connection was powerful. And when the armed struggle movement, you remember that's how African Liberation Day came about, supporting the armed struggle in Africa and Mozambique and West Africa, Namibia, and all these revolutionary countries. Talk to me about this. There's a concern people have about Russia and China. And I hear some people now saying, well, where was Russia and China when all this stuff happened with Venezuela? And also, of course, BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and about 20 other nations now are saying the hell with the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, coming up with their own stuff. But that alliance is nebulous. That alliance is, and you said this to me one time, you said, every country is out for their own personal interests. So they'll make alliances, but the bottom line, they're not in these coalitions for the benefit of the other country. It's going to be for their particular country. Russia and China, I know in the 60s, they were supporting a liberation movement, and I didn't know a whole lot of African people who had Chinese last names and Russian last names, so the colonization didn't happen. Where do they stand now, and how is our alliance now?
Well, I think it's generally true that every country, you would see every state looks out, generally speaking, for its own interests. It's not going to do anything that defies its own interests. But there was a time in the international community where some movements, and especially those that were led by revolutionary communist organizations like the Chinese and Russia, they saw the success of the revolutions in Africa as in their interests. They really did. I mean, and there was a time in Russia where they had characterized racism as a national security issue, national security problem. There were times in Russia in the 1920s, Russia had declared that African people in this country were how did they characterize it? An oppressed nation that was the leadership of the oppressed nations, African oppressed nations. So Russia had that history. That's why Hubert Humphreys, when he was vice president, he had this discussion with Khrushchev, who was then the head of state of Russia, and he talked about how he was blown away because Khrushchev knew all the history of the civil rights movement. He knew everything about it, more than what Humphreys knew. And he said because they taught that in the schools in Russia. You can't even get that in the schools in the United States, but they were teaching that in Russia. So there was that sentiment, there was that revolutionary consciousness, etc., that existed at the time. But when's the last time you heard anybody talk about revolution, whether it's in China, Russia, whether it's in even Venezuela? They weren't talking about revolution. What has happened is that the movement had come to such a standstill that people were trying to find the best place they could. They were negotiating the best deal, the best place they could within the existing mode of production. Do you see the point I'm making? I mean, and so it's not bad mouthing any of them, because we work with people who we know have different interests than we have. We just have to know what our interests are, so that you can have relationships with people with differences with you if they're going in the same general trajectory that you need for them to go in. And sometimes you can even pull together organizations like that, okay, this is the trajectory we need to go in, and we know there's a greater likelihood we can get there if we have this relationship with these other forces. It's our responsibility to look out for us. The Chinese do not have a responsibility to look out for us. The Russians do not have a responsibility, and except, you know, they can talk about morality and moral responsibility, but it's our responsibility. And that's why we have to build our own capacity. And then in that so doing, we can come into relationships. That's why they wanted to put me in prison for 15 years. Because I went to Moscow. And by the way, I'm a pretty well-read kind of person, but they had me fooled about Russia. Because when I got to Russia, it ain't nothing like what you hear otherwise. But and the Russians were generous, you know, in terms of their treatment. And I'm talking about in the streets, in the communities, and stuff like that. So anyway, that's part of what, you know, we had to get the word out. We had a strategic objective to letting the people know this is what's happening to African people in the United States, and that we are part of a revolutionary African movement for the total liberation of African people, etc. That's why we had to go there, and that's why if you were at the trial, you heard the kind of stuff they were saying, that what the implications were. So yeah, we want to win whatever allies and friends we can win to get where we need to go, not where necessarily they need to go, except to the extent that we can convince them that going here with us is going to be helpful for you too. Which makes sense.
Chairman, we're learning, we're hearing you and learning so much that is not in the mainstream press. But as you talked about the Uhuru Three, when I saw them take the president and the first lady out, I thought about how you and Sister Ona were forced out when they came and raided your home and went through all of your things and confiscated all of your materials. But as we're talking about the U.S. and its capturing, stealing, and controlling the oil in Venezuela, we know that the U.S. dollar is losing value. And we know that there's a general de-dollarization going on around the world. And normally, trade with the oil has to be in the U.S. dollar. But there were some instances recently where trade in the oil was other than the U.S. dollar. And understanding that the United States, of course, is looking to try to get any kind of foot up or advantage, what do you think is the correlation or the understanding or the underlying factors in also now controlling the oil from Venezuela, controlling the price, determining how it's going to be released into the market?
I think that's a really important aspect of it, because you just mentioned, you know, petrodollars is what you're talking about, that the people have been forced to pay for this oil in U.S. dollars and what have you. And because the U.S. went off the gold standard, you know, some years ago, and there's nothing that backs the dollar up. There's no, you know, there's no wealth that backs it up, you know. So what backs the U.S. dollar up is guns, and I mean this literally. It's got the guns and what have you, and any messing with that, because you know how many trillions of dollars the U.S. in debt, and how much of that debt is owned by China. But it would be a bold move for any country to try to get pay that debt, to get that resources right away. That's what killed Gaddafi, as we know. That's responsible for the attack that's been made on so many other leaders. So it's a tricky kind of situation. I think that we will see a growing, and I think this attack that they just made in Venezuela continues to undermine their authority and undermines the legitimacy of the state, the U.S. colonial state. And I believe one of the things they were trying to stop, and that's why what Trump did was so important, is that the last period, the United States has been losing influence in so many places. We lost in Afghanistan. Couldn't even make the Saudis do what they want. The Houthis blocking, you know, access to the Red Sea, so that where much of the world trade is going. You have, you know, a number of various kinds of victories being made, and 25-year war against Afghanistan, and they couldn't pull it off yet. So this is the U.S. needs the ability to tell the population in this country, because that's one thing about white power. One thing about U.S. philosophically, ideologically, that's important is invincibility. It's that we run everything. That's what we run it, and that's what Trump. You see how Trump talks? We run it. It's ours to run, etc. And this is really, this is something that's really important for the psyche of the white man here and in other places around the world. So the petrodollars, the whole BRICS phenomenon. I'm hoping that it can become more consolidated. I mean, the Russians had proposed some time ago, and we see other countries talk about a multipolar world, and which is simply saying that somebody else should have some power other than the United States.
Right. You know, it's real deep, Chairman. BRICS, with all its internal conflicts and contradictions, they're developing the unit as a currency. And the unit is going to be backed by gold coming from some of the BRICS countries. The unit is also going to be backed by the currency of the BRICS countries, the yuan, China, the ruble in Russia, and the real in India. They're going to back it by their own currency, and they have their own new development bank, the World Bank, and the contingency agreement to replace the IMF. So between the rise of BRICS with all its contradictions and the rise of the Sahel revolution in Africa, Benin, they had a coup. It was thwarted, but the seed is planted. And then all of those surrounding states, we're seeing, as you have mentioned, since I've known you, the declining American empire. And the 48.5 million of us in America, in our last few minutes we have left, the 48.5 million of us here in America. How does all of this global interaction, this global change, what are we supposed to do in the belly of the beast? Because if this thing falls, we surely don't want it to fall on our head. We got to be doing something in the belly of the beast with our money, with our people, 48 million strong, strategically in the belly of the beast.
So you're saying, Charles, we don't have a Samson complex. Bring it down on. I'm talking to you biblically.
I say, try to
Take
get
me too.
I have some influence on
read
my
that
man.
book too. What you're reading, that's good. That's a good thing.
Listen, here's what I would suggest. I really would hope, and I know you are going to be there, and I hope your lovely first combatant is going to be there as well. But I really would hope that people would come to our plenary in April. That's just 3 months ago, from now or so. It's really important because we want to talk about and give a whole strategic approach, accessing the whole situation in the world and how, things are unfolding, what we have to do. And we'll answer, some of these questions in that process. But I think it's a new day now. And I know it's a new day. And I would really hope that people would come to St. Louis. And first of all, like the first combatant, has just mentioned, to see concretely how we're in the process of undermining the whole colonial project, which is the basis for the attack on us. Venezuela, undermining the colonial project, the basis of the attack on them. Palestine, undermining the colonial project. Afghanistan, all these people and countries are trying to take back their resources and build. And this is a real important thing to recognize, that it's the success in building our own reality that is the threat to the social system. They need to be able to control us, every aspect of our lives, and even our dreams need to be in their possession. So at the moment, we are in constructing a new future. It's going to be a future without the colonizer. There ain't going to be no more colonizers. That's over. And so please, I hope that our viewers can get to St. Louis for April 17th through the 19th. And it's going to be extremely important, the discussion that we're going to have. because we're going to go through most of what we see happening in the world. We're going to have people connected from various places in the world who will be there. Mm-hmm. And I want to make also accessible to you in the event that you're interested in this, the comrades in Venezuela too, who you can talk to them. They're really on the ground and really involved politically there mm-hmm. on the ground in Venezuela and have been for a while now. So I know that's not the best answer, yeah,
look,
we can.
You have done in all of the forums that I've come to that you are a part of organizing. There's always been a global perspective as you're acting locally.
Yeah,
to be able to connect the two. I've been to Cuba and I've been to Venezuela, and when we went to Cuba, Inez and I, we were in the International Medical School, where tuition's free for people from all over the world. Lo and behold, I got to talk to them, and who says, "Hey, Councilman Barron, a brother and a sister from East New York,
yes,
was in Cuba."
Yes,
and they had to make a commitment to come back to East New York with that knowledge. When I went to Venezuela, the same thing. When Hugo Chavez came to Harlem, it was Citgo, the Venezuelan oil company, that was providing free home heating oil for people in Harlem, Brooklyn, and Boston. And for those who had eye problems and needed cataract operations, Venezuela provided that.
Yeah.
Cuba wanted to send some assistance to the Katrina victims.
Yes.
And said no. So when we say, well, why should we be involved in Venezuela or Cuba or Africa? What does that have to do with us? In addition to what Malcolm said, why you left your mind in Africa, in addition to that, there's some material benefits for us.
Sure.
The connection must be made.
And that's really serious, because Cuba is in bad shape right now. Because one aspect of this attack on Venezuela was to cut off this lifeline to Cuba. And Cuba is really, 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 really suffering right now. And I'm sure that there are all kinds of agents also there to foment whatever they can in the face of people not getting medicines and medications. These sanctions, the countries that have various kinds of resources, medication that would be trading with Cuba, they are threatened by the sanctions. Anything that has any percentage, a certain percentage of U.S. materials in them, if you trade with Cuba, you pay a horrible price. And so that's what Cuba's facing right now. And that's one of the reasons. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Well, hopefully this is where BRICS comes in. Hopefully that those sanctions wouldn't be honored by the countries of BRICS. And there's like 20 countries of BRICS. So if they begin to use their own currency and begin to unite around that, and Cuba and places like Burkina Faso and other places that are part of BRICS, hopefully these countries can come together and not fear the dollar, because they're developing their own currencies. That has to be developed, so the immediate crisis is there, but my hope is that it could be addressed as BRICS grows and develops.
Thank you, because I think the world is changing under their feet, and this is one of the things that's causing such a hysterical response on their part, that many people mistake this for strength. But when you have strength, you don't have to do the kind of stuff that they're doing now. The thing is falling apart, and so they're doing everything they can to suppress the history. History is going to happen. There's no way you can stop history, and that's what they're doing and trying to do anyway. So it's an incredibly significant moment, and it's for us as a people. It's because we exist in the world, and there are people who complain. Why are you concerned about them Arabs? Why are you concerned about this kind? Because we're in the world, and it's a colonial construct that we are all dealing with. So So I really appreciate this. I see that we've eaten up a clock here.
Look, that was good, Chairman. We want to thank you so much. Every time you come, what's that? The U.S. has moved this Navy from Venezuela to Cuba, and the U.S. Marines are doing war games in Puerto Rico. Well, they're gonna. This is once again, this is a dying capitalism.
It is.
Dying imperialism. Yes, they're still dangerous. Yes, it's going to get worse before it gets better. But guess what? It is going to get better.
It's going to get better.
Believe.
And we remember Vieques in Puerto Rico, you know,
That's
and
right.
yeah, so
That's right.
and the Bay of Pigs.
And the Bay of
And
Pigs,
as you
yeah.
always say, we are winning, and ultimately we will win. So this has been another series of Operation Power. We had our chairman on, Chairman Omali Yeshitela of the African People's Socialist Party, bringing it as only he can bring it. And we want to welcome you to come back next week for another inspiring, enlightening, informative program. And as we say after every program, the truth shall set you free, and power is the great equalizer.
Right on, come back.
And uhuru.
Uhuru.